Hello everyone, I am Stephen Drew from the Architecture Social, and today it's a Friday, but we're going international because it's all about being connected to people worldwide, and that's what I love. We're online, you can meet people all the time from different backgrounds, different walks of life, which is equally inspiring. So today on the Architecture Social podcast, I have a fantastic guest, Evelyn Lee, who is all the way from San Francisco, California. I was just looking on your LinkedIn there. Amazing, right? And so Evelyn Lee, she actually works in Slack, but more than that, she's a founder of Practice of Architecture and has an amazing background in architecture and now, doing all the digital tech in the world. So Evelyn, I'm so excited to have you here.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for that introduction, Stephen.
It was really hard to summarize your awesome career in one go because we've got the digital side of things, your background in programming, but you have a love of architecture, which is amazing. So, Evelyn, do you want to just quickly expand upon the introduction, maybe summarize a little bit about where you're at the moment, and then we can wind the clocks back after that?
Yeah, certainly. So, I'm a licensed architect. I think I'm the only licensed architect working at Slack Technologies.
Wow.
We have 3,000 people there, but I actually work on the employee experience side. So how do we inform a better employee experience for our employees going forward? And a lot of the work that I am focused on right now is what does the future of work look like, right? Slack, in spite of our tool, we were only 5% of our company was remote before the pandemic. So
really?
Now we've made this declaration, this public declaration that we are a digital first company. So we're still trying to understand and really define what that means for us and what that means for not only our office space, but how we continue to grow what the office is and how we work together as we become more distributed.
Amazing. And so for anyone that hasn't used Slack before, I've used it for a few years. It's a great platform to talk to people online. And as you said, it's really interesting to see from the use that you're involved in the user experience of it. And I will say on the record, I always felt it was quite slick. So I reckon you're doing a pretty good job in there. But let's wind the clocks back. So while you're in that digital technology space at the moment, so you studied architecture, and I can see that here in your background, because I've got LinkedIn app as well. You've got so much experience where you volunteered in the AIA and all that involvement. So do you want to just start back on many years ago? So at some point you felt like you wanted to study architecture, right? We all had that thing.
Right, absolutely.
Where did it start with you?
I think I was one of those crazy kids, right, that I knew in fourth grade, the story goes, and I'm glad this is an extended new audience for me because I know I've told this story before, but, fourth grade, my teacher is like, draw your dream house. And everybody tends at that age to draw an elevation, right? But I immediately remember drawing in plan, and this might give my age away, but like putting a Nintendo in every single room, not even a Super Nintendo, right, to play with. So that was kind of my first experience of it. And then from then on out, every time we went to the grocery store on the weekends, I would pick up these, those plan magazines, and I just flip through them. And that was really my aspiration. And I knew from a very young age that I always wanted to be an architect. And then, of course, I think after you get to what the realities of that really entails, and finding out more, that's when I began to question my career path. But I went and got my Bachelor of Architecture. I went and got my MArch from SciArc, mostly because I wanted to come back and teach, which I haven't had the opportunity to do in a formal education setting. And then I went into practice. So I worked for a big box, a firm doing big box. So I know if you walk into, I don't know if you guys have Home Depots there. I don't know what the equivalent would be.
Similar. We've got the big IKEAs, and here you have like what's called B&Q, which is the Yeah, which is the equivalent. Good old B&Q.
Okay, so I would like be able to probably walk into B&Q, tell you where every single rack is located, whether or not the restrooms have been mirrored. And then we always joked that there's some sites that we delivered cheapo depots because it was like just out of box with like no frills. And then, some sites we got to actually do, I don't know, EFIS details, which was more exciting. So those were not the cheapo depots. And then I did community buildings and schools because I thought that was going to be so much more fulfilling than big box stores. And I felt really disengaged because architects want to be able to design for the end user. And I felt like I never got to talk to the end user, even though I was doing schools and colleges and community buildings. So I left. I went and worked for a friend who was running a nonprofit organization called Public Architecture. It's since dissolved, but at the time I ran a program that asked architects to give 1% of their billable hours towards the public good pro bono. We did have some international representation on that list, but if you think about it, that means collectively we would have formed the largest pro bono design agency there is for architecture design. And my experience there was that it was 2006, 2007. Architects were doing really well at that time. They were more than happy to give their hours away, but the nonprofits didn't understand what architects did, which I think we can all relate to our clients not fully appreciating our full extent of our capabilities. And I realized I didn't have the vocabulary, that I needed to kind of really talk about our value to these potential clients and how we can integrate and we can come in before you even decide whether or not you need a building, and we can change their existing space to get more money from founders or to support their operations better. So I went back to school, got my MBA, got my MPA, came out and joined an architecture firm that had a strategy group. And I helped lead that strategy group for 5 years. And what was really interesting was it was a medium-sized firm. And they developed the strategy group because they believed architects get involved with their clients too late in the process. Usually we're invited when an RFI comes out, or an RFP comes out. That's our first engagement. But how can we help them decide whether or not they even need to go to an RFI and RFP, better understand how they use their spaces and get in ahead of that decision-making process? And that's where the strategy group came in. So we did everything from replan library systems, like help reprogram library systems in communities, to help restructure entire school districts, helping decide actually what elementary schools to close down in a district. That's pretty contentious. To helping workplaces ultimately decide how much space they need, how many conference rooms they need, whether or not everyone needs desks. And then I left and I went to workplace consulting for the Savills, Studleys, and the Newmark Knight Franks. And I know you guys at least have both of those out in your direction.
Absolutely. I've worked with Savills. That's a big company, isn't it, as well, international?
Yes. So I was with them on there's a brokerage side and there's a consulting side. So I was with Savills on the consulting side. And then my team went to Newmark Knight Frank. And then I landed internally at Slack. So really supporting all the needs of our 3,000 employees. And I hope to continue to do so when we're in the process of getting acquired by Salesforce. That's pretty public information. So my world might change come the acquisition. But I'm hoping that it only gets bigger.
Amazing. That's so cool. I love the journey across there, the organic journey across, as you said, the going across workplace and Savills and then, you're at Slack, and it all kind of connects in a weird and wonderful way. What's really interesting and liberating, I guess, from the outside perspective, is that what I love about your career trajectory, and for anyone listening here, it's non-conventional in an awesome way. Like, it makes complete sense, and it can also seem like wow, how is that possible? But on the other hand, it makes complete sense for someone from an architectural background and workplace to be at Slack and be designing the user interface. But what I love is that it's perhaps a career trajectory that most people haven't thought of, because I think that one of the preconceptions in the UK is that there's like this defined path as an architect, and to go off it seems crazy. So, you study, and then you work in practice, and then you get qualified, and then you keep going up and up and up. And it was a similar thing for me, Evelyn. I remember when I didn't want to get qualified in the UK, and I was like, I still want to be in the industry. I just want to do things a bit differently. And at the time I was a little bit nervous to talk about it, because I had one or two dear friends, and they were just like, Steve, have you gone crazy now? Come on, come back. You need to get qualified. You need to do different things. But actually what I love is that you can make an impact doing things differently. And I love seeing that throughout your career as well in Slack. And I can see that you've had your own blog before and various other things. Is that similar then in the US, that there's a conventional path for architects, or do you find that it's a bit more liberal compared to the UK?
There's definitely a conventional path. And I think it's, and I was really engaged in the AIA when I was going through the licensure process. And I got licensed on the outset, and I'm still very engaged in the AIA. We can talk about why if you'd like. But I was on the national board. I was associate director to the national board at that time, and I had past presidents who were mentors. I had, mentors all over the US, and they're like, what are you doing? Why are you stepping away from architecture? At that point in my life, I had just really hit a wall because I felt I joined architecture and pursued it because it's so meaningful, again, to here I am building space that's for students of the future. But then really kind of disappointed in what the actual realities of being an architect for a school really meant, especially all the hoops you have to jump through in California. So, but then at that point, right, I've sunk 6 years into my education, my higher education, and I've sunk an additional 4 or 5 years in practice. So how, I think we need to get out of our own way, right? Like, oh my gosh, I spent all this time on this career path. But even from school, we're taught like really the only career path after school, even though people say, oh, you have an architecture degree, you can do anything. The career path that people really talk about is the only way to make it in architecture is to pursue partnership, right, in a firm or start your own firm. Yeah. So there is so I think we set ourselves up in this very narrow field. And even when people talk about stepping away from traditional practice, it's funny to me because they are like, well, I'm going to go into construction administration, or I'm going to go into I'm going to go to the manufacturer side. But it ties very much closely back to traditional practice. We have a very hard time unboxing, here are all the skills that we've gained and how can we apply that to other avenues of work. That's, it's a little bit of, we need to get out of our own way but there's definitely added external forces, I think, in the profession saying this is the only way to find success and still be an architect.
Yeah, it's really interesting that what I find is that, and we were in one of the conversations, weren't we, on Clubhouse, where actually I do think you're right that this preconception, it's slowly starting to change. And I think that and it will be interesting. So with Reba, actually, and this is probably an announcement, Evelyn, but hopefully you'll enjoy this, is that there's a Reba Council in the UK. Everyone can apply for a position. And one of the positions, and the seat on the council, is for an associate position. And that means that someone like me can apply for it. So I think I'm going to run for it. And why not, right? Because
and you should.
I'm going to do it. So I was like, I spoke to a few of my friends and they're like, oh my gosh, you're going to do it? And then I had the same reaction. I was just like, Well, look,
Why not?
I can be professional. But then what I love about that seat was that associate position is a really strange, because I'm not qualified, even though I did 5 years, and I think people can get lost in the system. And hopefully, like we'll touch upon what you do with practice in architecture, which is amazing, and I love what I do, but with the Architecture Social, and you can really touch base with a lot of people and make a difference in an unconventional way, and I think that's really important. And another good example is I believe we talked about it before, but for anyone that doesn't know, the Architecture Social is built on a platform called the Mighty Networks. That's the community part of it. And it was really interesting that the person who designs it is actually an ex-architect as well. So I was watching his update, and he was like, right, so here's my demo of a conceptual community called Californian Architects, and here's all the updates. And when I was watching it, I was like, this is the Architecture Social. So I reached out, he said, oh, that's great. And it was a really, really small world. But I love the fact of that architects and architectural professionals, architecture students, you can go and do amazing stuff. And actually, one of my best friends was studying architecture. He is a front-end UX designer in the UK. So, and it was interesting. He said that because of his design skills, he could approach tasks that not a lot of the programmers could do. And it had an immense value in the role. And like you said, while architects can transition to client side, they can work for a developer. Actually, I love what you're on about, because you're right that is different, but it is close as well. You can also do amazing stuff as well. I actually know of a hairdresser that used to be an architect, and because of the way because he was an architect, he would cut hair in sections, and it's so differently, and maybe that there's like a little part of that, and maybe there was marketing part of it. And I love the fact that he brought his past into a current business, and it was highly successful. Why wouldn't you want a haircut by an architect, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I mean, yeah, so I love this like liberating vibe, and that's why I find really inspiring from what you've done. If you don't mind, I would love to talk about the practice of architecture for a bit as well, because there's so much going on with that. You've been doing it for 8 years, which is amazing. And kind of you do it in addition to what you do on Slack as well. So for anyone that is not familiar with the practice of architecture, do you want to tell us a little bit about what it's about first?
Yeah, and the practice of architecture has gone through multiple pivots, right? Which I think is good. It's healthy to continue to pivot. But I had been engaged in the AIA long enough to see the wheel come full circle, right? To see us continuously complain, even after a decade of service, we give too much away. You know, like all the things that you usually hear architects complain about. Our clients don't value us. You know, we need, and then of course, even at the entry level, like we need to get paid more. But then I have to ask, well, why aren't you getting paid more? Clients don't value us. Okay, well, why don't clients value us? And you kind of have to keep asking why to actually drill down to the real reason. But you know, for me, the practice of architecture is really, and I've said this a few times, and you can find it probably in print on ArchConnect, I think, but I've opened up some talks saying, you know, the practice of architecture is 3 recessions away from being extinct, because, and there's no real science behind that, but it's the notion that every time we fall into a recession, because architects are subject to one of the most historically cyclical economic cycles ever. There's always time when our clients are building. There's always time when our clients aren't building. And when our clients aren't building, but especially during recessions, pandemics, what have you, we lose sometimes a full generation of architects. And we don't ever recapture them into the profession. So how do we deliver services and value to our clients? That means that we can continue to make money even when they aren't building, and expand the value of what we do. It's always interesting for me to hear, at least in America, there's this desire from principals of firms, like, I want to be that first person that when my clients call, no matter what their problem is. But unless you're delivering on a wider value proposition, you're never going to be the first person they call unless they know that you can respond to problems outside of just purely their building needs. So it's expanded, right? Right now, we're really focused on helping firms transition successfully to a more flexible work after the pandemic.
Right.
I've found that architects, I'm worried that we're going to try to be more flexible upon reentry, and then the partners are going to say this isn't working, and it's going to very quickly go back to life as normal.
Right. Okay. I can see that as well. It's a 50-50, isn't it? It's like because what I would say, Evelyn, in working in recruitment is you were right. Before the pandemic, I would speak to a few talented people, and they were like, "What do you think about the possibility, Steve, of me working remotely?" And I used to say to them, with a smile and a wink, I used to say, "Keep dreaming, my friends. I mean, right. I know you'd love it, and I know that you could do it online, but it's not me. It's the practice owner who sets the terms of engagement." And I would find that even part-time roles were really hard to get. You had to be like, you would know the business owner for years. You built a rapport, right. And perhaps it was, a mother who was, picking up kids and stuff. And it was only because of the wealth of rapport that's built over the years that maybe you would get this situation.
Right. Or you've had to worked in a firm for 10 years before they allow you to go work.
Yeah, exactly. And even in this part-time role then, I would say, and look, we're talking in an abstract sense, yes. Based upon anecdotal sense, based upon my experience in recruitment. But what I would say is that the downside then of these kind of flexible roles is that I think that the psychology was that you were indebted to the employer, and therefore actually people in these flexible arrangements, they wouldn't get paid as much. And I think that what's interesting, the one good thing about the coronavirus is that it completely smashed it out of the park for that. I mean, it was awful in one sense that recruitment, and when I was in it, it died. And, I was on the government scheme, and the upside of that, though, is it brought out creativity, and that's where the architecture social came. But in terms of architecture, what's interesting is it completely smashed the perception of we have to be in an office, because businesses were still doing deadlines, they were still getting to places, and there was things going out the door, and there was less projects, but businesses didn't collapse. And actually, a lot of people I spoke to, there's one or two directors that they were like, "Steve, I love it because I'm not spending an hour traveling to a meeting and just to be there, and an hour back, I can get what I need to do at home." And actually, it was interesting that most employees would work harder at home just so that they could keep working at home. And it wasn't the opposite of everyone thinking they're going to be watching, stuff on Netflix and doing the washing machine. Things were functional as normal. But to bring it back to your point now, this in the UK is very timely, where there is, I think that now it really goes down to the practices beliefs. And so there will be a few companies that are like, you should come in, basically. And then I would be really interested to see the ones that as you said, the emphasis is on, you should come back to the office full time or part time, or maybe it's okay not at all. But I have a funny feeling, and call me the cynic in me will think that what would be interesting is to see if that there's a unconscious bias, a preference towards people that will work in the office full time than those who want to work remotely. So you're right. I don't have the answer, and we're on that cusp. I think it will be interesting, though, to see where it goes, because it is uncharted territory now, isn't it? Where we know that we can work remote, and we know that's a possibility. At the same time, though, there is something nice about going into the office, but where's the line? And so it'll be really interesting, new territory.
Yeah, and I think I see a lot of architecture firms trying it, but doing so haphazardly, right? Like they're not setting up all the tools they necessarily need. Like they're not necessarily investing in all the tools they need to have this collaboration happen no matter where you're working from. Or they're not, or they're like, oh yeah, we kind of have this flexible work policy, but they're not necessarily fully committing it to it from a leadership perspective. So they might say, yeah, you can come and go as you want, but me as a partner, I'm always going to be in the firm. The managers are going to always be in the firm. So the behavior says you really, if you want to go anywhere in this firm, you need to be in the firm, even though we've said we have a lenient, flexible work policy. So that's my biggest thing. And again, I think it's architects getting in their own way a lot, right? Like we tell our clients to reimagine how they walk through three-dimensional space, but heavens forbid, like we reimagine how we bring on new graduates and mentor them from a remote position. You know, they're like, we need to throw them into deep end. They need to be fully immersed and picking up on all the subtleties that's going around in the firm. And what's so funny for me is I walk into these firms and all of their young people are like noses deep in CAD with their headset on. And I'm wondering, like, how much are they really picking up subliminally?
I remember where I worked, they actually banned headphones, and it was one of these bizarre things where I was kind of on the fence, because on one hand it's like, oh, come on, really, we're going to ban that? But in the other sense, I got why, because you're disengaged, aren't you, in your mini CAD world doing something, and you're not picking things up and you're not collaborating. And it's interesting, actually. So where I can talk about it now. I've just left McDonald Company, and it's a great place to work. And I actually tried hard to introduce Slack to the practice, and which is interesting because it's great, and we saw all the benefits, and we were international. But like everything else on the other side, what I saw is that it didn't work. It really didn't work, and it wasn't due to Slack or the systems, because it was the best one out there to talk. It relied on people participating, and so we had the opposite effect of it. It was just, so I set it all up, and it's like, hey, it's amazing. It's a section. Here's this. We've got the architecture team, we've got development, and we can put news. And what's clever about Slack is you can get webhooks in. And so I was all there with all the info coming in, but no one used it. So it was like the opposite, or the digital version of what we're on about now, because, and with that, actually, what was interesting is I had the managing director on board, but what I forgot, it was people's behaviors and preconditions, and so it was the interesting thing. And you're right, where I wonder in terms of architecture practices, it's the same thing of you can introduce tools to emulate this stuff, but really people have to be on board, and it kind of has to work. So it's a really catch-22 thing. And I think, like, in terms of the offices, it will be really interesting to see. And so the company that I'll be joining, they're going to have, so I will be working in, in an architecture practice, helping them find people on board. And so part of the reasons why I've taken this job, Evelyn, is that I find it a really interesting challenge in terms of how do you attract the best kind of people, and how do you foster the culture? So on paper, it seems like I'm just finding people, but like you said, it's really deep in the roots, because one of the things that was great so far is, and we'll see how it goes when they get there, but the practice has been super encouraging about culture, because actually culture is how you retain the best people. And a little bit about, when you were talking there earlier about, the practice not trusting people, or they've got to come in, actually, I think those companies in the long term lose, because people go, they get burnt out, they go somewhere else. And actually, if practices can trust the people and give them a framework to thrive and engage with others, and also feel inspired and can inspire others, people are more likely to stay, which bizarrely has, why I say bizarrely, because what's interesting is most businesses don't see the financial gain on keeping people happy. It's like, oh man, do we need to pay for a fruit bowl? That's expensive and all this stuff. But actually I'm like, if you want to get a recruiter to replace someone, it's so expensive.
It is. And you've been on that side. It costs like $250 I don't know, Gallup said 250% of a person's salary, like every time you have to go replace them. If you think about the bringing on a recruiter, the hours spent off of projects to go through the interview process, right? And then training them up even to company standards after you bring them on. So.
Yeah, it takes up a lot of time. And you're right. There's so many facets in hiring people. Is an extremely tight, and no one likes recruitment. As in, and hiring can be an amazing thing, and you can get excited and you want to bring someone on, or it can be a total headache. And I'm sure you've been in that position, Evelyn. As you know, when you're trying to find the right person, or you got the budgets, and you need to get on board the directors, and there's so many factors involved. It can be amazing, or it can be a nightmare. So I like to use the term, it's a job in its own right, which you got to do while you do architecture as well. But I think we'll all have to watch that space really on how it shapes up. Maybe we'll have like another podcast in like a year's time where we'll be like, hey, it went really well. Or we'll be like, oh no, you're right. We've got 2 more recessions before the extinction. But so let's talk about a few of the things, like literal things on practice of architecture, because I had a quick look at Instagram and I saw what you're up to. And one of the new podcast episodes, you've got a guest key speaker who is from Boston Dynamics. Is that right? Mm-hmm. That's so cool.
Yeah, I mean, so Brian Ringley, we just launched his episode on Thursday. So we launch every Thursday, U.S. time. Actually, I don't know when it goes live. We'll just say every Thursday. We launch a new episode, and we're shooting for 40 episodes this year.
Wow.
But yeah, Brian, so we have a whole series focused on architecture where we bring on people that have an architectural background. They may or may not have gotten licensed. In this case, Brian didn't get licensed, but he has landed on the robotic side on Boston Dynamics. And because of his background in architecture, he actually helps build that relationship with contractors and kind of what can spot the robot who...
So cool.
Just Google Spot the Robot. I'm sure you've seen Spot on YouTube somewhere. Cool. But what are additional applications Spot can have in construction? So he's actually primarily working with contractors more so than architect, but he's found himself, working for the most advanced robotics team there is globally.
I love it. So, I mean, in terms of the topic, because I've done 1 or 2 podcasts about alternative careers, and actually it seems like a lot of people engage with that. So on that basis, probably a mini shout out. I know it's mid-podcast or what have you, but check out Practice of Architecture online and check out Evelyn's podcast because it's really cool. I will be listening to Boston Dynamics one because, I know Spot the Robot. It's so cool, isn't it? I mean, that is the future. It's almost a bit scary when you see Spot the Robot. It's like like the Terminator. Have you seen that episode of the Black Mirror with the robot dog? Because I'm just like, I can see that like we're fastly approaching that. But
gladly they're not that fast yet. So.
Oh, that is a definitely optimist way of looking at it. But I tell you what, I love technology. I'm not worried about, as saying Terminator and Terminator 2. Skynet's not going to kill us all. I think that it's super exciting, isn't it, Boston Dynamics? And again, what a nice uplifting story to hear that someone from an architectural background is doing that. Another
interesting one to listen to is during season 1, if you look up Architecture, and we had somebody towards the end of the season from Lucasfilms. So she went out, she graduated from SciArc. Oh my gosh. And she was an artistic director on The Mandalorian. So definitely listen in on that one as well.
Oh my gosh, the fanboy in me. I love The Mandalorian. LucasArts is so cool. The Mandalorian, it was really interesting. I think I saw just pre-pandemic, when I was a lot skinnier and going to events and, I had my suit on and stuff, I went to one where Autodesk, I think they collaborated on the Mandalorian project with the technology, the way how it's captured, because the CGI in the background is rendered in a different way. And it was absolutely amazing. Let me just touch upon one thing you said there. So SciArc sounds like the coolest university in the world to me. I don't know whether it's just the name or... I think I was listening to the owner of ArchConnect is like from SciArc, and he's a good example actually as well, isn't it, of someone that studied architecture who's gone on to make an amazing platform, which does a lot of stuff that I respect and inspires me on the Architecture Social, to be honest. I loved his podcast, and I got a mutual friend who knows him, and apparently he's a really sweet guy, and is obviously incredibly smart because he set up ArchConnect. He's a bit of a computer gamer as well, so it inspires me with hope that maybe one day I can get to ArchConnect levels. That would be nice.
Yeah, they've been going at it for quite a while, but definitely.
They've been going at it. What's really interesting, and tell me, I'll stop meandering, but what I love about ArchConnect is that the forum, right, is anonymous. People are anonymous. So it almost brings out that, again, we're talking about people's behaviors and workplace and all this stuff. What's interesting about online forums is that in ArchConnect, everyone's anonymous. So you get the best, the worst. And I really enjoyed one of his stories about, like, if anyone posts for reviews and like their work, there'll be like that one guy in the forum who's like angry with life, who would just like tear people down. And it's really interesting in these online anonymous forums and like Reddit, you just get the comments everywhere. Yeah. I'm used to it and running YouTube as well. I've got a YouTube channel where you'll just get like sometimes someone just rip into you. You get the happy ones and you will rip into them. But what's interesting about the Architecture Social, and I try to get the balance right, and it is difficult sometimes, is that it's a bit like LinkedIn, as in no one's anonymous. But my problem is with LinkedIn is that I talk to you about how much I love the platform because I like that you can get organic growth. I like that you can really promote amazing stuff on there and get great visibility. Whereas on Facebook, you got to pay thousands and get nowhere. Sorry, I'm not the biggest fan of Facebook. Evil corporation. I like LinkedIn for that aspect. I just found that some of the content is a little bit boring. It's and as in, to be informative, you don't need to be dull. And that's why I try to do the bells and the whistles and all this stuff. But what I love about with the practice of architecture, it does have quite a fun tone in it. So, Evelyn, I've got my mini rant out of my system about Facebook. What is next on the agenda for yourself and practice of architecture, potentially? Do you have anything you want to conquer next?
Yeah, I mean, so, obviously, sorry, Rebecca Bookbinder, episode 19 is the LucasArts, creative
Amazing.
director, if you want to go visit that, if you want to go listen to that one. But, and it's, Practice Disrupted is the podcast of Practice of Architecture. But if you go to practiceofarchitecture.com, there's a link to the podcast. Yeah. What's next? Like I said, right now we're focused on growing the podcast, growing listeners. We have booked all 40 episodes almost of this season, of this year. And we're not even halfway through the year. So I don't know. We might be planning out into season 5 already here soon.
Wow.
And then really focused on helping firms transition to the hybrid practice. And then another thing that we're doing, and it might actually be interesting to the REBA guests, to the REBA side, is we have another series on the practice of architecture talking about giving voice to the minorities. So for last week, we actually just released one on Asian American architects, focused on the Asian American voice. It was a great timing because this is AAPI History Month too. But we previously also did an episode focusing on the LGBTIA community. And then we also did Black future voices in the profession. So we are going to bundle those and essentially create courses for firms who are interested in beginning to talk about equity, diversity, and inclusion and just don't know how to, right? So then your firm could buy this collection of courses, and then along with the podcasts, we would have some structured content so the firm can begin to have conversations about what does this mean for the makeup of our firm now, how we bring more EDI material like EDI into the firm from a value standpoint, and how do we change our recruiting? So that's on the docket kind of after I wrap up this hybrid practice stuff, which will be in July. So coming like the last quarter or last half of the year, that's the next iteration of what we're going to put out there.
Amazing. I really look forward to it. So cool. I'm not surprised that you filled all the slots up yet. If someone backs down though, I can always swoop in. But right now it sounds like the quality's up there. So, great. I think that's amazing. So we've covered a lot now, I guess. So in future, I'm going to ask one. I'll send out questions in advance. But what I love about this conversation is that we've completely freestyle. It's from the heart as well. I mean, what I would love to hear is your thoughts for if you have any advice for students at the moment. That it's been a bit of a strange time, and
yes.
I would love to hear your thoughts or any advice to our listeners on for anyone studying how to feel or how to go ahead. If there's any advice you have. On the top of your head, it would be amazing to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, and then I think this is a bit timely too, because at least in the US, right, a lot of graduations are starting to happen. I'm assuming that's true of the UK. So I think you're graduating into auspicious times. Like, let's just be clear. You're not only competing against your class, but you're competing against everyone who got laid off. And people from last year's class who are still out of work. So it's, I would say don't get discouraged, at least in the US, with the number of vaccines that we have circulating, like we're definitely seeing things starting to improve. I'm going to throw this out there. There are a lot of architecture firms who kind of behave badly. Like, you will send out a lot of resumes and portfolios, and you probably will not hear back from a lot of firms. I wish that wasn't the standard, but it's the reality of what's there. I would say really focus on firms that you really absolutely know in your heart you want to work at. Like, make sure you're catering your resume, your cover letter, anything that you send over to them to showing how you are a unique applicant to that firm. Like, put a little extra time in them. Firms can tell when you send out form letters. Stephen can tell you that. I don't need to go deeper in that. But it's also, I think, if you find yourself frustrated with the architecture profession, there is a way back. I think there's been great examples coming out of the last recession of people who have gone and done even UX for a little bit, or done something that parallels the creative industry and have found their way back from that. So if you need to broaden your search a little bit more, great. And on the flip side, I think we have people like Stephen, we have people like myself in the profession that's looking to expand the tent and recapture those people that go down different paths anyway, if you end up going somewhere else. So always know that you have a community. I don't think you ever truly leave architecture. We've all have that shared experience of going through studio, and the shared language of what architorture really is. So that will always be with you. This community will always be with you. You will never be alone in that sense.
Well said. I mean, I should have tested my soundboard before. Let's see if I can get the clap up. There we go. Did you hear it?
Yes, thanks for that.
So you're gonna be like the last person on my season 1, which has gone on for ages. So I love it. I've not organized it. I should have done seasons. But in season 2, there'll be more soundboards in a professional tone. So thank you for letting me test that. That's amazing advice. I loved it. Absolutely loved it. I think that, you know what, like you said, I don't regret studying architecture for a second. It's still one of the best things I ever did. And I've kind of gone on an unconventional journey. But you know what? I wouldn't change it for the world. And I think that I constantly see people on the Architecture Social who say they want to go into writing or journalism and they don't know how. And I would encourage you to explore that. And you can always, like in a smart way, while you work in an architecture practice, you can build up your blog. This is a great era to do all this stuff. If you want to do a YouTube channel, there is nothing from stopping you doing it other than your own energy and how much you put into it. And you can really, it's such a great time to do well, I know the buzzword is side hustles. Well, I think they're passion projects or whatever you want. I think it's such a good time to do it. So Evelyn, I think it's only fair in this podcast, and this is something I want to do in season 2, where the person who is joining me on the show, and I really appreciate and love, they get to ask me a question on the top of their mind. So is there anything you want to spring on me or ask me?
Wow. What is your hope for the future of practice? Like, and we could go far out, like 10, 20 years. Has practice evolved, and how?
Okay, good question. You really, and I'm going to answer it super off the hip. So I would like to see, I think one of the biggest challenges is a few large scale architecture practices, which I think were built up a ecosystem on unpaid overtime and, hard work and graft and kind of this old school attitude. But I actually think that there will be a shift. And I do think that, and I've seen that there's a few companies who are quite progressive, do really well. So where I see the future of practice, I think we're at an age now, and this because we've seen it online, people talking that there is a shift, and I do think that I reckon these old school companies will keep doing the way they're doing it. What I predict, though, is that there's going to be a few people that get ahead of the curve, and because they're a more fun place to work and they're more adaptive and more progressive, that they're going to get the best people. And I think that's going to be inspirational. So in my head, and you work in these worlds, so it might not be the best example, the kind of the Google way, or what I imagine the Google way of, you get smart people, you give them autonomy, there's great food, the people can come in and out and do like a bit of their own projects. I think that this is the way that practices get the best talent and keep people, and that the architects are inspired. So I'm hoping we see more vocal stuff, and I think that the future of practice has to evolve. But my role in that, and I guess it's an ongoing thing, is educating the architecture practices and the business owners that actually there's a massive economic gain to it. And if I can get that message across, and that's the important bit, economic gain. I know it sounds almost a little bit saddening, but it's true. The good news is, though, is that there is a massive economic gain to looking after people. So to answer your question, the future of practice, I hope to see that the industry evolving into and we get rid of those preconceptions of, as you called it, and I haven't used this word before, architecture. And I think that like Game of Thrones, have you seen it? When it's like the shame. I think that, yes. I think as a culture, we're starting to realize we don't need to accept the status quo. And I'd like to see any listeners here to empower them to, work in a practice which looks after people. And I mean, I was lucky that where I worked in architecture practice was good, but I've worked in a few places outside of architecture where I was like, man, this is no fun. And do you know what? Actually working in a place that is difficult is helpful perspective, but don't think that you have to stay there or that is just how it is everywhere else. Kind of take that knowledge and go somewhere else. And then when you go somewhere else that's better, don't you? You're like, oh my gosh, much better than that place.
Right. It says a person who has a deep knowledge of recruiting, like it's okay to move around a little, like no longer is it like you need to have 5 years at each of the firms on your resume, right?
Yeah, that's a really good point as well to touch on, because I see two sides of it. So there was a point when I was jotting around every year, and especially when I was finding my feet. So where I worked in architecture practice, I worked for 3 years, but then I worked in one recruitment company. I left, I set my own, and then I did my own venture, and I had one or two of these years stints. And I think what's interesting in the UK, you can get a bias towards you. They're like, you a contractor? Are you not loyal? And I think that's slowly shifting. It is nice to stay somewhere for an extended period of time so that you get to see the change, because I do think that when you're somewhere longer than a year, you see what happens, what doesn't happen, what's possible. You see people change, you see people come and go. At the same time, though, especially earlier in your career, I agree with you, Evelyn. It's good to shorter stints, while you're working out where you want to go, is completely normal. And I think it can be really helpful because I've seen some people who work in an architecture practice for 20 years and they're amazing, but they only know the one way. Whereas I think if you go to other places, you learn that this isn't the best way, but you realize, some things in this company are amazing, but I actually liked how this company did it before. So I think it's a bit of both worlds. Stay somewhere where you enjoy for a long time, but don't be afraid to look around, especially early in your career, because it's like traveling then, isn't it? You pick stuff up and you learn, which is enriching. And
I just want to, you can cut this out of the podcast if you want, but I do want to wish you best of luck as you run an associate director for Reba. I kind of want to call
associate member. I wish it would be associate director.
Well, okay. So here I'm using AIA terminology. So I do kind of want to call Reba out on this. We've had a student and an associate director on our national board for well over 15, maybe even 20 years. So get with it, Reba. This is coming from an AIA national board member. So yes, I'm glad they're taking these steps. It's steps in the right direction. But we also had a policy that called out, we have it written into our awards that there's a declaration that all of our awardees have to sign saying that they do not have unpaid interns in their firm. You have to sign this declaration in order to be a part of the awards process. So another step that Reba could potentially look at taking.
Yeah, I think they're aware of that this needs to be addressed. And don't worry, everything goes in the podcast. And hey, I don't worry. I've outed myself anyways.
You should be a director, though. It shouldn't just be an associate member on the. You should be a full. Whatever associate they put in that position should have as much weight as the oldest person on the Reba board.
I agree. And don't worry, you know me, I'm not the quietest person ever. I will be respectful, but I will make a presence known. So, and don't worry, I've outed myself to Reba. And you know what? They were really nice. So I speak to Reba Education's a particular team in Reba because they are a big company. And yes. Reba Education, I do admire a lot, and I've spoke to them, and they really want to make change. And as you know, and I know, though, it's one thing to say that it takes a while in a big organization. A good analogy I like to use is like a big organization. Sometimes it's like the Titanic, whereas a small company, you can move around like a zipper boat. But getting change in these big companies takes a lot of time.
I know, but we're like... Yeah. Well, our membership has slipped, but AIA at its prime was over 95,000 members large. And we definitely have our faults. I'm not going to say we are where it's at, but Reba, catch up to us at least, please.
I hear you. And don't worry, I'm coming for it. I'll be on the ballot poll. Representing.
Vote for Stephen.
Yeah. Yeah, I need like a good slogan. I'll have a think of it. But that'll be fun. I'll do one of them videos where I'm like, vote for me, But great, Evelyn. All right, we'll have a little roundup now. So it's amazing. So we've actually had a really nice organic chat. We've covered a lot. We talked about what you do, practice of architecture, and all the amazing stuff on the podcast. And I do want to do a quick shout out to that. Where can we find that, Evelyn? What's the website address?
It's practiceofarchitecture.com. So one long word, practiceofarchitecture.com. There's a link to the podcast right there. If you're on your favorite podcast listening app, you need to search for Practice Disrupted is the name of the podcast.
Ooh, such a good name. I love it. I'm getting excited about it. That's awesome. Everyone can find you online as well. You're on LinkedIn. I believe you're on Instagram. We're everywhere. So you're Evelyn Lee, you're actually on the Architecture Social, which I admire. I know you're busy, but you are around.
I will accept awesome. Direct messages. I will apologize to anyone in advance if it takes me a super long time to get back to you, but just keep hounding me.
Don't worry. That's all cool. That's amazing. And I will get Practice of Architecture up on the Architecture Social website so people can find it. Me and Evelyn are going to sort that out afterwards. This has been amazing. Thank you so much for making your time on a Friday evening. An absolute star. Evelyn Lee, super inspiring. architect and visionary, and I love what you do. And let me know if you need me to sub in on one of the people if they drop out. Thank you, Evelyn.
Will do. Thanks, Dan.
Have a lovely day. Take care. Bye.